The rain hit the windshield like static, and Chloe Davenport had exactly 40 minutes to deliver a crate of chemical restoration fluid to a château that didn't officially exist on any map she trusted. "Château de Sterling," she muttered, squinting at the GPS pin blinking somewhere in the black tangle of the Loire Valley. Sure, real cozy name for a house buried in a forest. She'd been a courier for Meridian Logistics for 6 years, mostly hauling wine crates and the occasional stubborn antique clock. Tonight's job was different. A rush order, triple pay, and strict instructions to hand the package to no one but Kalen Sterling himself. She didn't know who that was. She assumed rich. She assumed difficult. She was half right. The iron gates groaned open before she even knocked, like the house had been waiting for her. She parked her battered van beside a fountain that probably cost more than her apartment, grabbed the crate, and pushed through the towering front doors, which, oddly, were already ajar. "Hello? Delivery for—" The word died in her throat. A man was on the floor of the entry hall, one hand clutched against his chest, his face a shade of gray that no wealthy person's face should ever be. Beside him, a floor lamp had toppled, and an antique tapestry, massive, ornate, clearly ancient, hung crookedly off the wall like it had just been yanked down in a struggle. "Oh my God." Chloe dropped the crate and ran to him. Hey, can you hear me?" He gasped, a thin, rattling sound, like his lungs had forgotten their job. His lips were faintly blue at the edges. Chloe had done first aid training for the job, mandatory in case a client keeled over from champagne and stress, but nothing in that training covered this. "Someone help!" she shouted, and her voice cracked through the marble halls. A door burst open down the corridor, and a woman in a cardigan, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, rushed in with a medical bag already in hand. "Move him onto his back, now!" "What's wrong with him?" "Acute reaction. I'm Dr. Helene, his physician." She was already pulling out a stethoscope, pressing it to his chest, frowning at what she heard. "This isn't a heart attack. His throat's swelling. Anaphylactic, but not from food." Her eyes darted to the crooked tapestry on the wall, then to the faint metallic tang in the air. The same smell Chloe's crate of cleaning chemicals gave off, except sharper. Wrong. That fabric. He's been restoring it himself. There's a preservative in old textiles, heavy metal-based, some are still legal, barely, and if it's degrading, it off-gasses. He's been breathing this in for hours. Is that lethal? It can be, if his body can't clear it fast enough. Doctor. Helene pulled a slim device from her bag, a compact blood analyzer, and pricked Chloe's finger before Chloe even understood what was happening. "Hey, what are you doing?" "You're the only other person in this house right now, and I need a baseline. Standard protocol, forgive me." The doctor's eyes were on the little screen, waiting. Then they widened. "That's unusual." "What's unusual?" "Your plasma markers. You have an elevated chelation protein. It's rare, maybe 1 in 500,000 people carry it at this level. It binds heavy metals and clears them from the bloodstream naturally, safely. It's the kind of thing hospitals dream about and can't manufacture." She looked up at Chloe like she'd just found a coin worth more than the mint that made it. "It might be exactly what he needs." "Wait, you want to put my blood in him?" "Not blood, plasma, a filtration exchange, slow and controlled. His synthetic antidotes aren't working fast enough, and I don't have hours to wait for an ambulance down these back roads." Her voice was calm, but Chloe caught the edge of real fear underneath it. "I know this is not what you signed up for tonight, but he doesn't have a lot of time, and this house is very isolated." Chloe looked down at the man on the floor, a stranger, rich, apparently reckless with dangerous fabric, and dying on his own marble floor. She should have said no. She should have called this in and let professionals handle it. Instead, she sat down on the cold stone beside him. "Fine. Do it." The procedure was quieter than she expected. A hum of machinery, a line running between her arm and his, Dr. Helene's steady hands adjusting dials with the calm of someone who had done far stranger things in this house before. Chloe watched the man's chest rise and fall, waiting for it to even out. Halfway through, his eyes opened. They were dark, unfocused at first, then sharpening, landing on her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning room. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Something passed between them in that look. Startled, searching, almost disbelieving, as if he'd expected to wake up to nothing at all, and instead found a stranger sitting steady beside him, glaring down at him like she'd personally decided he wasn't allowed to die tonight. Chloe glared right back, arms tense, jaw set. "Don't you dare thank me yet," she muttered. "You still owe me 40 minutes and a signature." He almost smiled. Almost. Then his eyes slid shut again, and the machine kept humming, and outside the rain kept falling on a house that, Chloe was beginning to suspect, held far more secrets than one dying tapestry. Chloe woke up on a couch that cost more than her van, wrapped in a blanket someone had clearly not asked her permission to put on her. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the collapsed man, the tapestry, the tube running between her arm and his, and she sat up so fast her head spun. "Careful," said a voice from the doorway. "You gave a fair amount of yourself last night." Kalen Sterling stood there in a plain gray sweater, looking nothing like the gray-faced, gasping man from the marble floor. His color was back. His eyes, the same dark eyes that had locked onto hers halfway through the procedure, were clear now, alert, studying her the way she imagined he studied his antiques. Carefully, like she might turn out to be valuable. "You're alive," Chloe said, because it seemed like the most useful thing to say. "Largely thanks to you." He said it simply, without the theatrical gratitude she expected from someone who lived in a house with its own fountain. "Dr. Helene tells me you've been asleep 4 hours. You should eat something before you go." "I'm not going anywhere for breakfast, Mr. Sterling. I'm going back to my van, delivering the rest of my route, and pretending this whole night was a very strange dream." She threw the blanket off and stood, immediately regretting it as the room tilted slightly. "I have a job. An actual job. Not the kind where people almost die on the entrance rug." "You gave your blood, your plasma, to a stranger at midnight," Kalen said, something almost amused flickering at the corner of his mouth. "I'd say you're already deeply involved in whatever this is. I'd say I did my Good Samaritan duty and now I'm free to leave." She grabbed her jacket off the arm of the couch. "Thank you for not being dead, genuinely. Best of luck with your tapestry. I'll invoice Meridian for the delivery and let them sort out the rest." She made it exactly 6 steps toward the door before he spoke again, quieter this time. "Dr. Helene wants to run one more test. On you. To make sure the exchange didn't cause you any harm." A pause. "I would feel considerably better if you'd let her, before you drive off into whatever roads got you lost enough to arrive 40 minutes early." Chloe stopped, turned. "I wasn't early. I was exactly on time, which is more than I can say for your front door being wide open in the middle of a storm." "Fair." He almost smiled again, that same restrained, careful thing, like smiling wasn't something he did often and had to be handled delicately, like glassware. "Breakfast, 20 minutes, then Dr. Helene's test, and then you may leave. With my sincere apologies for the inconvenience and, I imagine, a rather generous adjustment to whatever Meridian is paying you for tonight." "I don't want your money." "I didn't say it was for you to want. I said it was happening." He turned and walked toward what she assumed was the conservatory, not waiting to see if she'd follow, which annoyed her more than if he'd begged. She followed anyway, mostly out of curiosity. Mostly. The conservatory turned out to be a glass-walled room, dripping with morning light and green things she couldn't name. A long table set with more silverware than her entire kitchen owned. Dr. Helene was already there, tapping something into a tablet, looking considerably less frantic than she had 8 hours earlier. "Ah, good, you're both upright," she said. "Sit, eat. I need 15 minutes and one more blood draw before I sign off on either of you being fine." "I'm fine," Chloe said, sitting anyway because the smell of fresh bread was doing something unfair to her empty stomach. "You're fine, probably," Dr. Helene corrected. "I'd like to make it confirmed." Kalen sat across from Chloe, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He didn't have the look of a man used to sharing a table with people who talked back to him. She guessed that from the way he kept glancing at her like he was recalibrating something. Good. Let him recalibrate. She wasn't going to shrink because his house had a fountain and his sweater probably cost her month's rent. "You're upset," he said finally. "I'm delayed. There's a difference. I've got 3 more stops today and a supervisor who does not care that a stranger almost died on his hallway rug." "I could call your supervisor." "Please don't." "I could also," he continued, ignoring her flat tone entirely, "simply pay for the entire route myself, so you're not delayed at all." That's not how a job works. You don't get to buy your way out of the fact that you scared the life out of me last night." She stabbed at a piece of fruit with more force than necessary. "I'm not impressed by the château or the tapestry or whatever antique title you carry around. I filtered your blood, not your ego." Something in his expression shifted. Not offense, but something closer to delight, like she'd said exactly the thing no one in this house had said to him in years. "Doctor." Helene cleared her throat, holding up the tablet. "Results are in, for what it's worth. Kalen's toxicity markers have dropped 80% since last night. Whatever the two of you did in that exchange," she looked between them, amused, "worked cleanly. No damage to either of you." 80%, Kalen repeated, and looked at Chloe like the number meant something far bigger than blood chemistry. Chloe just reached for another piece of bread, refusing to admit, even to herself, that some small, stubborn part of her wasn't in as much of a hurry to leave as she claimed. Breakfast should have been the end of it. Chloe told herself that 3 times as she followed Kalen down a corridor she had no business being in, toward a room he called the restoration studio, and she privately called the scene of the crime. "I just want to see it in daylight," she said, mostly to herself. "Then I'm gone." The studio was nothing like the rest of the chateau. No gilded frames, no crystal, just clean work tables, soft overhead lighting designed to flatter old fabric instead of people, and racks of tools that looked like they belonged in a hospital more than a house. The tapestry itself was laid flat now, spread across a padded table, no longer crooked and half torn from the wall, but stretched out like a patient waiting for surgery. Chloe stopped a few feet away and just looked at it. "You can get closer," Kalen said. "It's stable now. Dr. Helene had the studio ventilated and sealed the piece in a containment sleeve before she'd let anyone near it again." "It's beautiful," Chloe admitted, and meant it. Rich greens gone soft with age, faces stitched with more patience than she could imagine. A hunting scene unfolding across the border in threads finer than hair. 16th century? Supposedly. It's been in my family's collection for 4 generations, verified by 3 separate authenticators over the decades. He said it with the particular weariness of a man reciting a fact he was starting to doubt. "I was examining a loose thread in the border last night when I started feeling ill. I assumed it was exhaustion. I didn't think much of it until I was on the floor." Chloe leaned in, careful not to touch, tracing the border pattern with her eyes the way her grandmother used to when she inspected a piece before buying it at auction. Something itched at the back of her mind. Small, nagging, the kind of detail her family's whole textile business had been built on noticing. Can I ask you something that's going to sound strange?
After last night, strange is relative.
Fair. She crouched, angling her head to catch the light differently. Do you have the provenance records? Photos of the original border pattern from decades back? Kalen pulled a folder from a locked drawer without hesitation. Clearly, he'd anticipated needing them eventually, or maybe he just liked being prepared. He spread black and white photographs beside the tapestry, each one dated, each one stamped with an authenticator's seal. Chloe studied them for a long moment, then looked back at the fabric on the table.
Kalen.
It was the first time she'd said his name instead of Mr. Sterling, and neither of them seemed to notice. The weave direction on your border is wrong. What do you mean, wrong? 16th century Flemish tapestries, and everything in these photos tells me that's what this piece is supposed to be, used a specific warp count along the border, tighter than the body of the piece, because the border had to survive handling and framing without fraying. Your border, she pointed, careful not to touch, is loose, looser than the body. That's backward. Nobody weaving this by hand 400 years ago would make that mistake. It's not how the technique works. Kalen's face didn't change immediately, which told Chloe he was the kind of man who needed a full second to let bad news land before he let it show. You're saying it's not authentic? I'm saying whoever made this is extremely good, good enough to fool 3 authenticators. But they made one mistake. The kind of mistake you only catch if you've spent your whole life around actual antique looms instead of just documents about them. She straightened, glancing at him. My family's run a textile restoration workshop for 3 generations. I didn't grow up rich, but I grew up around fabric that was actually old. This piece is a replica. A masterful one, but a replica. And the toxic coating? That's the part that scares me a little, Chloe admitted. Because you don't accidentally coat a fake antique in heavy metal aging chemicals strong enough to nearly finish someone. That's not sloppy forgery. That's deliberate. Someone wanted this piece to look dangerously old, and they didn't care if the toxins hurt whoever examined it closely. The silence that followed was heavier than any silence Chloe had sat through in that house so far, heavier even than the one over the man dying on the floor, because that silence had been about survival, and this one was about betrayal. If this is a replica, Kalen said slowly, working it through out loud, then the genuine piece, the one my great-grandfather acquired, the one that's supposed to be sitting in my vault in Paris right now for the exhibition next month, isn't here. Someone swapped it. Someone with access to your studio. Someone who knew enough about your collection to pick a piece worth stealing, and enough about forgery to make a convincing copy. Chloe crossed her arms, feeling the shape of the problem settle over her like a familiar weight. That's not a random thief. That's someone close to you. Kalen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fake border like it had personally insulted him, which, in a way, it had. I have an exhibition in 3 weeks, he said finally. International collectors, museum curators, journalists. If I show up with a forgery and someone else notices what you just noticed, my reputation, my family's collection, everything, it's finished. And if I don't find the real piece before then, I lose it forever to whoever is selling it. That sounds like a you problem, Chloe said, though without much conviction. It could be an us problem. He looked at her directly now, and there was nothing careful about it this time. Just something urgent, almost pleading, underneath the composed surface he'd worn all morning. You saved my life last night, without knowing anything about me. And in one morning, you found something 3 professional authenticators missed. I need someone with exactly your eye, Chloe. I'll pay you properly, a real consulting contract, not charity, not a favor. Help me find out who did this before the exhibition. Chloe looked at the ruined, beautiful fake tapestry, then at the man asking her to step even further into a house full of secrets. "I have a delivery route," she said, which wasn't a no. "I'll make it worth abandoning today's route," Kalen said, which wasn't exactly reassuring, but somehow, standing in that quiet studio with the morning light catching all the wrong angles of a very convincing lie, Chloe found herself nodding anyway. The private train car smelled like cedar and old leather, and Chloe spent the first 20 minutes refusing to admit she was impressed by it. "You could have just booked us regular seats," she said, sinking into a chair so soft it felt like an ambush. "This seems excessive for a 2-hour ride." "It's excessive for a 2-hour ride whether or not I'm on it," Kalen said, settling across from her with a folder of gallery inventory records balanced on his knee. "I inherited the car along with the château. I didn't design the excess, I just failed to get rid of it." "That's the wealthiest sentence I've ever heard." "Noted. I'll try to sound poorer." Outside, the French countryside slid past in long, green streaks, vineyards giving way to small stone towns, and back to vineyards again. Chloe had signed the consulting contract that morning, a real one with actual numbers that made her blink twice, and had spent the train ride so far half reading gallery vault schematics and half wondering what exactly she'd agreed to. "Tell me about Vivienne," she said, tapping the folder. "Your senior gallery manager, the one who signs off on all the chemical inventory." "She's been with the gallery 11 years. Before that, she trained under my father." Kalen's voice was even, but something tightened at the corners of his eyes. "She's meticulous, difficult to impress. I've never had reason to doubt her." "Everyone has reason to doubt everyone, Kalen. That's just called being an adult." Chloe closed the folder. "I'm not saying it's her. I'm saying whoever swapped that tapestry needed studio access, timeline knowledge, and enough expertise to fool 3 authenticators. That's not a random guard or a delivery driver. That's someone inside your circle." "I know." He said it quietly, like the admission cost him something. "I've spent my whole life being told who to trust based on bloodlines and reputations. It's strange, hearing it questioned by someone who's known me less than a day." "Someone has to." Chloe shrugged, though she softened it slightly. "You clearly don't have anyone doing it for you." He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt it, that same searching look from the night before, when he'd first opened his eyes mid-transfusion. Except now there was no fever behind it, no desperation, just quiet, deliberate attention, like he was cataloging her the way he'd catalog a piece he suspected was rarer than it first appeared. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You can ask. I make no promises." "Why textiles? You said your family runs a workshop. Most people who grow up around a trade run from it the first chance they get." Chloe was quiet for a moment, watching the vineyards blur past the window. "My grandmother used to say, fabric remembers things stone doesn't. Every thread has a decision in it, a weaver's hand, a mistake, a fix. You can read a person's whole life in an old tapestry if you know where to look." She smiled, a little embarrassed at herself. "I used to sit under her work table as a kid, sorting scrap thread by color while she worked. My mom did deliveries to keep the workshop afloat when things got tight. I guess I just inherited both halves of it. The eye for fabric and the job driving it around in a van." "That's not inheritance," Kalen said. "That's devotion." "Don't get poetic on me, Sterling. I still owe Meridian an explanation for missing today's route." "I already called them," he said, mild as anything. "Told them you'd been reassigned to a special consulting project, effective immediately, fully compensated on my end." Chloe stared at him. You can't just call my employer and rearrange my entire job." "I can, actually. I did. Was that overstepping?" "Wildly." "I'll apologize properly once the exhibition crisis is resolved." He didn't look sorry at all, and infuriatingly, Chloe found that almost charming instead of annoying, which bothered her more than the overstepping itself. She changed the subject before she had to examine that feeling too closely.
What about you? Big house, big name, and you're telling me you don't trust anyone close to you? That's a lonely way to live.
Something shifted in his expression, the composed mask slipping just slightly, just enough for her to see underneath it. High society isn't really society, he said. It's a performance with better lighting. Everyone I've grown up around is polite, articulate, and calculating exactly what they can get from knowing me. My father was the same way with people. I used to think that was just how adults were, until I got old enough to notice it made him miserable too, right up until he died. He looked out the window, not really seeing the vineyards. I don't think anyone's asked me a genuine question in years, not one they didn't already know the profitable answer to.
I asked you why you keep a private train car.
You did, and you meant it as an insult.
I absolutely did.
He laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him, nothing like the careful, almost smiles from that morning. It changed his whole face, made him look 10 years younger, and considerably less like a man who spent his life surrounded by antiques worth more than small countries. That, he said, is the most honest conversation I've had in longer than I care to admit. Chloe felt something warm settle low in her chest, unbidden and unwelcome, and pushed it down hard. She was here to find a stolen tapestry and collect a paycheck. She was not here to enjoy watching Kalen Sterling laugh, like the world hadn't ground the softness out of him yet.
Don't get used to it,
she said instead.
I'm still furious about the fountain.
Understood. The fountain remains a grave offense. The train rolled on toward Paris, and neither of them mentioned how much closer they'd drifted, quite without noticing, in the 2 hours since they'd boarded. Sterling Antiquities Gallery sat on Rue Saint-Honoré like it had been carved out of the street itself, a narrow, elegant facade of pale stone and iron-scrolled windows, easy to miss unless you already knew what it held. Chloe had expected something louder, something that shouted money the way the château did. Instead, it whispered, which somehow felt more expensive. Discreet, Kalen explained, as they stepped inside past a security guard who nodded at him without a flicker of surprise at the woman beside him. Most of our clients prefer their purchases don't end up photographed on a street corner. The gallery floor was hushed, all soft lighting and glass cases, but Kalen led her straight past it, down a narrow staircase to a reinforced door that required both a key card and a 6-digit code he entered without looking. The vault, he said, and pushed it open. It wasn't what Chloe expected. No rows of gold, no dramatic spotlights, just climate-controlled shelving, padded crates, and a wall of ledgers logging humidity levels, chemical treatments, movement records. It looked, more than anything, like a hospital for objects. Everything that comes in or out gets logged here, Kalen said, pulling a heavy binder from a shelf. Chemical inventory, handling records, transport dates. Vivienne oversees it personally, has for years. Chloe flipped through the ledger slowly, running her finger down columns of neat, confident handwriting. Her eyes caught on a string of entries near the middle of the book.
Kalen, look at this.
She turned the binder toward him.
3 shipments of restoration solvent, logged as routine replenishment, 6 weeks apart. But the quantities are almost triple what your other entries show for the same period last year.
That could be legitimate. We had 2 large restorations underway.
Sure, except, she flipped back several pages, cross-referencing dates. There's no matching restoration record for those weeks. No object logged in or out of the studio during that window. Someone ordered a lot of toxic aging chemical and didn't use it on anything the vault has on file.
Kalen's jaw tightened. Vivian's office is upstairs. Let's ask her directly. They found her at her desk, a sharp, silver-haired woman in her 50s with the kind of posture that suggested she'd never once slouched in her professional life.
She looked up, and her expression, for just a fraction of a second, flickered. Not surprise, Chloe thought. Something closer to calculation. Kaylin, and... Her eyes moved to Chloe, cool and assessing. A guest.
Chloe Davenport. She's consulting on an inventory matter. Kaylin set the ledger on the desk, open to the marked page. Vivian, explain these solvent orders. The quantities don't match any logged restoration. Vivian barely glanced at the page.
Shipping errors. The supplier double-billed us twice last quarter. I flagged it with procurement myself. It's a paperwork issue, nothing more. Do you have the correction paperwork? Chloe asked.
I'd have to dig through archives. It's been months. Vivian's smile was thin, practiced, the kind used on difficult clients rather than colleagues.
Is there a particular reason a delivery consultant is auditing gallery chemical logs, Kaylin?
There was an incident at the château, Kaylin said carefully. The Renaissance tapestry. It's been swapped for a forgery treated with the same toxic aging compound as in these entries. Chloe identified the forgery. I'd like to understand how it happened. For half a second, something moved behind Vivian's composed face. Gone so fast, Chloe might have imagined it, except she hadn't. Her family had spent generations reading fabric for the tiny tells threads left behind. Faces weren't so different.
That's a serious accusation, Vivian said evenly. I hope you're not implying I had anything to do with damaging a piece I've protected for over a decade.
No one's implying anything yet, Kaylin said, though his voice had cooled several degrees. We're gathering facts.
Then gather them elsewhere. I have an appraisal call in 10 minutes. Vivian closed the ledger with a firm, final click and stood, effectively ending the conversation.
Outside her office, Kaylin exhaled slowly.
She's lying.
I noticed the same thing, Chloe said. But we don't have proof yet. Just a bad feeling and mismatched paperwork. There's one way to get proof. Kaylin glanced back at the closed door. Her private workstation in the studio downstairs. If she's been handling the aging compound directly, there'll be traces. Solvent residue doesn't disappear just because you wipe a countertop. They waited until Vivian left for her call, then slipped down to the small studio annex where she did clothes restoration work. Chloe ran a gloved finger along the edge of the work table, then crouched to examine a drawer handle, catching a faint discoloration along the metal, a telltale rust-tinged stain she recognized instantly.
There, she pointed. That's oxidation from the same heavy metal compound that coated your tapestry. It's on her drawer handle, her chair arm, even the light switch. She straightened, feeling something cold settle in her stomach despite the satisfaction of being right. She's been handling this constantly, recently, and nowhere near any logged restoration project. This isn't a paperwork error, Kaylin. She's involved. Kaylin stared at the faint stains like they'd personally wounded him. 11 years, he said quietly. She trained under my father. She sat at my mother's funeral. And she's been feeding pieces from my collection to a forgery syndicate. We don't know the full picture yet, Chloe said, more gently now, watching something crack behind his composed exterior for the first time since she'd met him. But we know enough to follow the trail further. Whoever's buying these stolen pieces, that's who actually has your real tapestry right now, not her. Kaylin nodded slowly, pulling himself back together with visible effort, though his eyes stayed hard. Then we find the buyer, quietly, before Vivian realizes exactly how much we already know. They left the gallery separately, 20 minutes apart, on Kaylin's insistence. If Vivian's watching, I don't want her seeing us leave together, worried and whispering, he'd said, which struck Chloe as both paranoid and completely reasonable given the circumstances. She found him again at a small bistro tucked along the Seine, string lights strung low over a handful of outdoor tables, the river sliding past dark and silver under the evening sky. He'd changed out of his gallery suit into something simpler, a soft charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed up,
looking less like the head of an antiquities empire and more like a man who'd just had a very bad day. Which, Chloe supposed, he had.
"This isn't very discreet either," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Romantic river views, string lights. Are we hiding from Vivienne or auditioning for a postcard?"
Discretion doesn't have to mean misery, Kaylin said, and there was something looser in his voice than she'd heard yet. The tight, composed control from the gallery finally letting go. Just a little. Besides, if anyone from the gallery sees us, dinner by the Seine looks exactly like what a wealthy man does when nothing is wrong. It's better cover than skulking around back alleys.
"So this is strategy?"
Partially. He poured her a glass of wine without asking, which she let slide only because the day had earned it. Mostly, I wanted one evening where we weren't standing over ledgers and stolen tapestries. The food came slowly, the way it always did in places that cared more about the meal than the turnover. Soft bread, a rich stew, a tart he insisted she try, even though she claimed to be too full to manage it. The conversation drifted easily away from Vivienne, away from forgery syndicates and toxic solvents, into smaller things. Chloe told him about her mother's old delivery van, the one she'd learned to drive before she was legally allowed to, weaving through narrow village roads with crates of thread rattling in the back. He told her, hesitantly, about growing up in a house full of priceless objects and almost no warmth, about a father who measured affection in inheritance clauses, and a mother who died when Kaylin was young enough that he mostly remembered her through photographs rather than memory.
"That's a lonely way to grow up," Chloe said quietly.
"I didn't know it was lonely until recently," he admitted. "I thought it was simply how life worked. Meetings, appraisals, careful conversations with careful people. Then a woman showed up at my château at midnight, gave me half her blood, and told me my house had an offensive fountain." He looked at her, and whatever careful mask he usually wore had entirely slipped away, leaving something unguarded underneath. "Everything since has felt considerably less lonely, Chloe." She felt heat rise up her neck and busied herself with her wineglass to avoid answering immediately.
"Careful, Sterling. Flattery isn't going to make me forgive you for hijacking my job with a single phone call."
"I have no intention of apologizing for that. I'd do it again."
He reached into his jacket pocket and set something small on the table between them. A slim, antique silver lorgnette, its handle etched with delicate floral engraving, clearly old, clearly valuable.
"Clearly not something you gave a stranger casually. I want you to have this."
"Kaylin, I can't take that. It's an antique. It probably belongs in a case somewhere, not in my coat pocket."
"It belonged to my grandmother. She used it to examine textiles, the same way you did this morning in my studio."
He nudged it closer.
"I've kept it in a drawer for 20 years because I didn't know anyone who'd actually use it the way she intended. You will."
Chloe picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands, feeling the weight of history in the small, cool metal. "This is a ridiculous gift for a delivery driver."
"You're not just a delivery driver anymore. You haven't been since the moment you spotted that weave pattern was wrong."
His voice softened further, losing the last of its careful distance.
"Chloe, meeting you has given my life a color I didn't know it was missing. I've spent my whole adult life surrounded by beautiful, priceless things, and none of them ever made me feel the way one honest conversation with you does." The string lights flickered gently overhead, the river moved slow and dark beside them, and Chloe felt something in her chest loosen that she'd been holding tight since the moment she'd walked into his hallway and found him dying on the floor. She'd told herself over and over across the last 2 days that this was a job, a consulting contract, a strange temporary detour from her real life. She was no longer entirely sure that was true.
"I didn't come here to fall for a client,"
she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I didn't intend to fall for the woman filtering toxins out of my blood." Kaylin said, equally quiet.
And yet,
Neither of them moved to close the distance across the small table. Not yet. There was still a forgery syndicate to unravel, still a real tapestry sitting somewhere in the hands of people who'd tried to poison him to cover their tracks. But something had shifted between them regardless, settled into place like a stitch finally pulled tight after being loose for too long. Chloe slipped the lorgnette into her coat pocket, right next to her heart, and didn't argue when Kaylin reached across the table and took her hand. "Tomorrow," he said, "we find out where Vivienne's shipment records lead."
tomorrow,
Chloe agreed.
tonight, just this.
The shipping manifest had been hiding in plain sight, folded into the back pages of Vivienne's private ledger where Chloe had spotted the solvent discrepancies. A single line, easy to miss unless you were looking specifically for it. L. Freight Transit, Warehouse 14, Lyon. Private sale, confidential buyer. No date of return, no corresponding gallery record.
She wasn't even being that careful,
Chloe said, reading it again on the train south.
or she didn't think anyone would look closely enough to catch it.
She's been getting away with this for months, maybe longer, Kaylin said.
People stop being careful when no one's ever questioned them.
Lyon's industrial district was nothing like Paris. Gray warehouses stacked along the river, delivery trucks idling in narrow lanes, the whole area smelling faintly of diesel and rain. Warehouse 14 sat at the end of a quiet street, unremarkable except for the discreet keypad lock on a side door and the two men in dark jackets who didn't quite manage to look like ordinary security.
We can't just walk in and ask for the tapestry,
Chloe murmured, watching from across the street. No, Kaylin agreed. But we can walk in as buyers. I have contacts in this world nobody's bothered to trace back to me yet. A private collector with money to spend gets doors opened that a police report never would. It worked better than Chloe expected. A quiet phone call, a name dropped that clearly meant something to the men at the door, and 20 minutes later they were inside, posing as a wealthy collector and his consultant, led through a maze of crated antiques toward a private viewing room at the back. And there it was. Chloe felt her breath catch. The genuine tapestry hung stretched across a display frame under warm, careful lighting, and even without touching it she could tell instantly. The weight of the fabric, the tightness of the border weave, the way centuries of careful hands had left their fingerprints in every stitch. It was breathtaking, in a way the forgery, for all its cleverness, had never quite managed.
"May I examine it properly?"
she asked the handler, keeping her voice level, professional, the voice of a consultant confirming a purchase and nothing more. Of course, buyer's inspection is standard. She stepped close, running gloved fingers along the underside seam near the corner, searching for the one detail she'd been hoping to find since the train ride down. Something her family had passed down through 3 generations of workshop history. A mark so obscure that only someone raised inside the trade would recognize it at all. There it was, a tiny, looping stitch pattern hidden in the silk backing, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look.
"Kaylin,"
She breathed, careful to keep her voice from carrying.
"This mark, it's a historical weaver's signature. My family's workshop cataloged pieces like this generations back, cross-referencing weaver marks against provenance records. I recognize this specific pattern from my grandmother's old ledgers. This piece was documented by weavers connected to my own family's history. There's no faking this. This is your original tapestry, beyond any doubt."
Kaylin's jaw tightened, satisfaction and fury crossing his face in the same instant. Then we've found it. But before either of them could plan their next move, a voice cut through the room from the doorway, sharp and cold. You found it faster than I expected. Vivienne stood there, no longer wearing the composed gallery manager mask Chloe had seen in Paris. Behind her stood 2 more security men, considerably less discreet than the ones at the front door.
Vivienne?
Kaylin's voice was carefully flat. I didn't realize you'd be personally overseeing your own theft.
I didn't realize a delivery girl would be clever enough to trace it,
Vivian shot back, eyes flicking to Chloe with real venom now.
11 years I built that gallery's reputation, while your father barely noticed I existed, and you were going to hand it all to a museum board that would have forced me into retirement within the year. This sale was going to fund a life I actually deserved.
By poisoning me, Kaylin said. By treating a forgery with a compound strong enough to end me, just to buy yourself time.
You weren't supposed to examine it that closely, Vivian snapped. You were never supposed to notice at all.
She gestured, and the men behind her moved toward the heavy loading bay doors, sealing the private viewing room's only obvious exit.
I'm afraid this conversation is finished. The buyer arrives within the hour,
and I'd rather not have witnesses complicating the sale. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic clang, and Chloe heard the distinct sound of a lock engaging from the outside.
She's actually going to leave us in here,
Chloe said, equal parts furious and impressed by the audacity of it.
Not if I can help it.
Kaylin moved toward the door, testing it uselessly.
Wait.
Chloe's mind raced back to something she'd noticed on the way in, a detail tucked into the ceiling near the loading bay. Easy to overlook unless you spent your life around industrial workshops the way she had.
This building has an automated fire suppression system. I saw the control panel by the loading bay entrance. If I can trigger the emergency shutter sequence, it'll seal every exit in this section from the inside, including whatever door Vivian's team is planning to move that tapestry through.
You want to trap them in here with us?
I want to trap them, specifically, while we're the ones who know where the actual exit control is.
Chloe was already moving toward the panel, adrenaline sharpening every thought.
My family's workshop had an ancient system just like this one. I know exactly how to work it.
Outside, she could hear Vivian's voice barking instructions, the low rumble of a transport vehicle pulling into position, completely unaware that the two people she'd just locked away were about to turn her own warehouse into a trap of its own. The control panel was older than Chloe expected, all heavy switches and yellowed labels, the kind of industrial hardware nobody bothered upgrading because it still worked exactly the way it was built to. She traced the wiring with her eyes, matching it against the version she'd grown up disarming and resetting in her family's workshop every winter when the old system tripped itself over nothing.
Emergency shutter override,
she muttered, flipping the protective cover off a red switch.
This should seal every roll-down door on this side of the building, including whatever exit they're planning to use for the transport truck.
You're certain?
I'm certain enough. She glanced at him. Do you have a better plan?
No, Kaylin admitted. Do it. She threw the switch. A deep mechanical groan rolled through the warehouse, metal shutters rattling down along every exit in the loading bay section, sealing the space with a heavy, final clang. Outside, she heard the shouting start almost immediately. Vivian's voice, sharp with panic, ordering her security team to force the manual release.
That buys us time, not victory, Kaylin said, already scanning the room. There's still the interior door. If they get through that, they'll be walking into a sealed room with us in it, and no way out until someone opens it from a control panel they don't have access to.
Chloe wedged a heavy crate against the interior door for good measure, hands steady despite the pounding of her own heart.
I disabled the manual release lever too. It's a two-part system. My family's workshop had the same design flaw. Whoever built these things clearly didn't want a fire tripping the whole sequence by accident. On the other side of the door, the shouting grew more frantic.
A heavy weight slammed against it, once, twice, and then stopped. The muffled sound of Vivian's voice rising in genuine fury rather than command.
You have no idea what you've done,
Vivian's voice carried faintly through the metal.
That tapestry was my exit. My whole life's leverage against a family that never once thanked me for building their reputation.
Vivian, Kaylin called back, voice steady despite everything.
It's over. The buyer isn't coming through a sealed loading bay, and neither are you. Local authorities are already aware something is happening at this address. I made sure of that the moment we walked in tonight, as a precaution." There was a long silence on the other side of the door, and then, faintly, the sound of sirens threading through the industrial quiet outside. Real ones, distant but growing closer, exactly on schedule with the anonymous tip Kaylin had quietly arranged before they'd ever set foot in the warehouse.
"You planned for this,"
Chloe said, staring at him. "I planned for the possibility that walking a known thief into a cornered position might not go smoothly," Kaylin said. "I didn't expect you to seal the room yourself with an emergency shutter system, but I'll take it as a considerable improvement on my original plan."
"Which was?"
"Stall until the authorities arrived and hope nobody got hurt."
"That's not much of a plan, Sterling."
"It's the plan of a man who spent his life reading provenance documents, not disarming warehouse machinery." He allowed himself a small, tired smile. "You continue to be full of surprises." Outside, the sirens grew louder, then stopped, replaced by the muffled sound of authorities moving through the warehouse's main entrance, voices calling out instructions, the scrape of the manual shutter finally being forced open from outside. When the door to their sealed section finally rolled up, it revealed Vivienne standing rigid between two officers, her security men already cuffed and seated against a stack of crates, the transport truck idling uselessly in the loading bay with nowhere left to go. Vivienne didn't look at Kaylin as they led her past. She looked at Chloe instead, something bitter and almost admiring in her expression.
"A delivery girl," she said quietly. 11 years of careful planning, undone by a delivery girl with a good eye for thread count.
"I prefer textile consultant," Chloe said. "But sure." Once the warehouse had cleared into the organized chaos of an active investigation, officers photographing the tapestry, taking statements, confirming Kaylin's ownership against the provenance documents he'd brought along on instinct, Kaylin finally exhaled, the tension of the last 4 days visibly draining out of his shoulders for the first time since Chloe had met him. "It's over," he said, staring at the recovered tapestry, safely back under proper lighting, exactly where it belonged. "The forgery, the theft, all of it. Traced and finished."
"Not entirely over," Chloe pointed out. "You've still got an exhibition in a couple weeks, a gallery reputation to repair, and a very public explanation to give about why your senior manager was arrested trafficking stolen antiquities."
"All considerably more manageable problems than the ones we started with." He looked at her, and something in his exhaustion softened into something warmer, more grateful than she was entirely prepared for. "Chloe, I don't think I can adequately thank you for any of this. Not the tapestry, not tonight, any of it." "You can start," Chloe said, allowing herself a tired, genuine smile, "by never asking me to trespass into an industrial warehouse again." "I make no promises," Kaylin said, and for the first time since the ordeal began, they both laughed. Real, unguarded, relieved laughter, standing amid crated antiques and flashing police lights, the genuine Renaissance tapestry, finally, safely, home. 3 weeks was barely enough time to repair a reputation, but Kaylin Sterling had never done anything by half measures, and the Grand Alpine Hotel's auction hall in Zurich had been transformed into something out of a very expensive dream. Chandeliers throwing gold light across marble floors, string quartet tucked into a corner, and at the center of it all, displayed under museum-grade lighting behind reinforced glass, the genuine Renaissance tapestry, restored to its rightful place at last. Chloe stood at the edge of the room in a dress she still couldn't quite believe she was wearing. Deep emerald silk, simple but perfectly cut, chosen after an afternoon of Kaylin insisting, gently but firmly, that she let him handle at least this one small thing. She'd argued, she'd lost. Standing here now,
Catching her reflection in the polished glass of a display case, she understood why he'd insisted. "You look like you're about to bolt for the nearest exit," said a familiar voice behind her. She turned, and the argument she'd been rehearsing about the dress died somewhere in her throat. Kaylin wore a black suit with the kind of understated tailoring that only looked simple because it cost more than complexity ever could, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. "I look like a delivery driver playing dress-up at a gala, full of people who inherited their opinions along with their money," she said finally, mostly to break the silence, before it did something to her composure she wasn't ready for.
"You look like exactly what you are," Kaylin said.
"The person who saved my life, recovered my family's legacy, and exposed a theft 3 professional authenticators missed. If anyone in this room deserves to feel out of place, it's them standing next to you."
That's a very generous way of saying I still don't know which fork to use.
"There isn't a wrong fork tonight, Chloe. There's only the tapestry, the truth, and you." He offered his arm, and after only a fraction of a second's hesitation, she took it. The evening moved the way these things apparently moved. Introductions to collectors whose names she'd have to look up later, careful conversations with museum curators who eyed the recovered tapestry like a small miracle, journalists hovering at a respectful distance, waiting for the story everyone in the room already half knew was coming. Chloe found herself surprisingly unbothered by all of it, buoyed by the steady, warm pressure of Kaylin's hand at the small of her back whenever the crowd pressed too close. When the room finally quieted for his opening address, Kaylin stepped up to a small podium near the display case, and Chloe watched him transform in real time. The private, careful man from the château folding away into the composed, commanding presence he must have spent years learning to project. "3 weeks ago," he began, "this room would have gathered to view a piece I believed, wrongly, was untouched Renaissance history. I would have stood here and told you a story about my family's legacy without knowing that legacy had already been stolen out from under me, replaced with a forgery, treated in compounds dangerous enough to nearly cost me my life." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe felt her pulse quicken, watching him navigate the moment with a steadiness she hadn't seen from him even in the warehouse standoff. "I owe you all the truth, and I owe it to the people who made tonight possible." He paused, and his eyes found Chloe across the room, deliberate and unmistakable. 3 weeks ago, a courier named Chloe Davenport arrived at my chateau to deliver restoration solvent, and instead found me collapsing from acute toxic exposure. Her rare blood chemistry, a natural chelation trait most physicians never encounter in a lifetime of practice, stabilized me when standard treatment failed. The next morning, in my own restoration studio, she identified a forgery so precise it had already fooled 3 professional authenticators, simply by recognizing a weave direction that didn't match centuries of documented technique. More murmurs now, softer, genuinely surprised. She traced discrepancies through gallery inventory that I, frankly, would never have noticed on my own. She identified my family's authentic tapestry in a warehouse in Lyon using a historical weaver's mark passed down through her own family's generations in the textile trade. And when we were trapped by the very people responsible for this theft, it was Chloe's knowledge of industrial mechanics, knowledge earned, not inherited, that sealed the warehouse and ensured the people responsible for endangering my life and stealing my family's legacy are now in the custody of French authorities. He turned fully toward the crowd now, voice carrying clear and unwavering across the hushed room. "Whatever credit this evening offers for the recovery of this piece belongs to her. Not to my name, not to my family's collection, and certainly not to the institutions in this room that failed to catch what she found within a single morning." Chloe felt heat rise up her neck as every eye in the room turned toward her, a mixture of admiration and open curiosity replacing the polite, distant interest she'd been fielding all evening. Someone began to applaud, and the sound spread through the room until it filled the space entirely, chandeliers glinting off raised champagne glasses, the tapestry gleaming quietly behind its glass at the center of it all. Kaelin stepped down from the podium and crossed the room directly to her, ignoring the small crowd already angling to speak with him, ignoring everything except the woman standing there in emerald silk, looking equal parts overwhelmed and radiant.
"You didn't have to do that,"
Chloe murmured as he reached her.
I did, actually, Kaelin said quietly, just for her.
I've spent my entire life in rooms like this, and I've never once told the truth in one until tonight. Around them, the gala continued in a warm, golden blur, but for the first time all evening, neither of them was paying any attention to it at all. The gala noise faded to a low hum the moment Kaelin led her through a side door onto the terrace, snow dusting the stone railing, Lake Zurich spread out below them dark and glittering under a clear winter sky. The cold hit sharp after the warmth of the ballroom, and Chloe pulled her wrap tighter, though she suspected the shiver running through her had less to do with the temperature than with the man standing beside her.
"You disappeared people quite efficiently just now," she said. "I counted at least 4 collectors who looked personally wounded that you walked away mid-conversation."
They'll survive. Kaelin leaned against the railing, looking out over the lake rather than at her, which she was starting to recognize as the way he approached anything that actually mattered to him. Obliquely first, like circling something too bright to look at directly. I needed air and quiet. And you, if I'm honest, though I've been trying all evening to find a version of that sentence that didn't sound absurd.
"It sounds a little absurd," Chloe admitted. "But go on."
He laughed, soft and low, the sound carrying out into the cold. 4 weeks ago, I was a man who examined dead objects for a living and called it a full life. I nearly died examining one of them, and the last conscious thought I had before Dr. Helen's procedure worked was that I'd spent 36 years accumulating beautiful things and couldn't name a single person who'd genuinely grieve losing me. Only ones who'd grieve losing what I owned.
"That's not true anymore,"
Chloe said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. And that's entirely because of you." He turned to face her now, and whatever careful composure had carried him through the gala's speeches and small talk was gone completely, replaced by something rawer, more uncertain than she'd ever seen on him. "I want to be clear about something, Chloe, because I think it matters more than anything else I could say tonight. I am grateful you saved my life. I will be grateful for that until the day I actually die. But that isn't why I love you." The word landed between them plainly, without ceremony, and Chloe felt her breath catch despite every attempt to keep her composure intact. "I love you because you sat on my hallway floor and told me not to thank you yet," he continued. "Because you refused breakfast on principle and then ate it anyway out of pure hunger and stubbornness. Because you looked at a piece of fabric 3 professional authenticators had already approved and told me, flatly, that it was wrong, without a moment's hesitation about whether that might upset me. Because you've never once been impressed by anything I own, only by things I've actually done or said, and God knows there've been precious few of those worth being impressed by until you arrived." "Kaelin, let me finish, please. Because I've been rehearsing this since the train to Paris, and I'll lose my nerve entirely if you stop me now." He took her hands, his own slightly unsteady, which she found more moving than any polished speech could have been. "You are fierce and honest and entirely unimpressed by wealth or status, and I have never in my life met anyone who made me want to be a better, more honest version of myself simply by existing in the same room. I don't love you because you saved my life. I love you because of exactly who you are, and I would have fallen for you regardless of whether that tapestry had ever made me ill at all." Snow drifted down between them, catching in Chloe's hair, and she felt something in her chest crack open entirely. Every careful wall she'd built over the last month, every insistence to herself that this was a job, a temporary detour, finally giving way completely.
I told myself I wouldn't fall for a client, she said, voice unsteady now too. I told myself that on the train to Paris, and again at that ridiculous bistro when you gave me your grandmother's lorgnette, and again just now walking out here. And I have failed spectacularly every single time. She laughed, a little wet, a little disbelieving of herself. I love you too, Kaylin. Somewhere between the warehouse and the gala, maybe somewhere before that, if I'm honest with myself. I love you, and it terrifies me a little, because I don't know how a girl who grew up sorting thread under a workshop table fits into a world with private train cars and Zurich galas. You don't fit into it, Kaylin said gently. You've changed it. There's a considerable difference. He reached up and brushed snow from her hair, his hand lingering against her cheek, and this time neither of them hesitated.
He leaned down, and she rose to meet him, and the kiss that followed held none of the careful, measured distance he'd carried through every room they'd shared until now. Just warmth and relief, and something that felt, for the first time in either of their lives, entirely unguarded. Below them, Lake Zurich glittered under the winter moon, and behind them, through the terrace doors, the gala continued its golden hum, utterly unaware that the evening's real story had just quietly finished writing itself under the falling snow. When they finally broke apart, Kaylin rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathless in the cold. "So," he said, "I don't suppose you'd consider a delivery route that only ever leads back to me?"
I don't suppose I have much choice at this point, Chloe said, smiling against the cold air. You've thoroughly ruined me for regular deliveries, Sterling. Everything else is going to feel painfully ordinary now.
Good, he murmured, pulling her close again. I intend to keep it that way. The Loire Valley looked different in the soft gold light of late afternoon than it had that first stormy night. The château no longer a place of shadows and toxic secrets, but something closer to home, even if Chloe still hadn't quite gotten used to calling it that.
You've been suspiciously quiet all morning, she said, watching Kaylin from the passenger seat as the car wound up the long drive, the fountain she'd once called offensive, catching the light like it was showing off. Suspicious usually means you're planning something. I plead no contest to that. He parked, but made no move to get out, turning to face her instead, something nervous flickering under his usual composure, a rare enough sight that Chloe felt herself sit up straighter. There's something I want to show you. Before you say anything, I need you to know I thought about this carefully. It isn't impulsive.
Kaylin, you once rearranged my entire employment with a single phone call. Impulsive is sort of your whole personality.
Fair, he admitted, but this one I actually planned. He led her not toward the main house, but around the east wing, toward a section of the château she hadn't spent much time in, scaffolding still up in places, but clearly nearing completion, fresh stone and glass replacing what she vaguely remembered as old storage rooms during her first chaotic night here. Inside, the transformation stopped her cold. It was a restoration studio, but nothing like the small one where she'd first spotted the forged tapestry's flaw. This one stretched the length of the wing, flooded with natural light from floor to ceiling windows, work tables fitted with the exact kind of specialized equipment her family's workshop had spent decades wishing they could afford, humidity-controlled storage lining one wall, a small library of provenance archives along another.
Kaylin,
She breathed, turning in a slow circle.
what is this?
A foundation, he said, watching her reaction with something between hope and nervousness that looked almost unfamiliar on him. An independent textile restoration and authentication center, fully equipped, fully staffed once we bring people on, dedicated to exactly the kind of work you do. identifying forgeries, restoring history properly, training the next generation of people who actually know how to read fabric the way your grandmother taught you.
You built this,
She said, still turning, still trying to absorb the scale of it.
for me?
With you, he corrected gently, and reached into his jacket, producing a small velvet box that, for one wild half-second, made her heart stop entirely. Until he opened it to reveal not a ring, but a set of keys, old-fashioned and heavy, engraved with initials that weren't his alone. C.D. and K.S. I had the ownership papers drawn up last month, he continued, voice steadying now that the hardest part was said. Full co-ownership. Not a job, not a consulting contract, not charity dressed up as generosity. An equal partnership, Chloe. This foundation is half yours, on paper, exactly as much as it already is in every way that matters. I want you running this alongside me, as my partner in it, the same way you've been my partner in everything since that first storm. Chloe took the keys with hands that weren't entirely steady, turning them over, feeling the weight of them settle into her palm the way the lorgnette had settled into her coat pocket weeks ago. Another small, dense object carrying far more history and meaning than its size suggested.
This is... She laughed, a little overwhelmed, blinking back something suspiciously close to tears.
This is a lot, Kaylin. Even for you.
You saved my life with something you were born with, and you saved my family's legacy with something you spent a lifetime learning. It seemed only right that you should have a real stake in what comes next, rather than simply being the person I happened to get remarkably lucky with. He stepped closer, taking her hands along with the keys, folding them together. I don't want a version of this life where you're a guest in it, Chloe. I want a version where it's ours, equally, from the ground up. She looked around the studio once more, the light, the tools, the quiet promise of everything this space could become, and then back at him, standing there looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him, for all his wealth and name and careful composure, waiting on her answer like it was the only thing in the world that mattered.
I grew up sorting scrap thread under a workshop table, she said softly, dreaming about exactly this kind of space, and never once believing I'd actually stand inside one, let alone own half of it.
You own half of everything now, Kaylin said. The foundation, the estate, whatever comes after this too, if you'll have it.
That's a very large whatever, Sterling.
I intend it to be. He smiled, that same rare, unguarded smile she'd first glimpsed on the train to Paris, now worn easily, often, like something he'd finally remembered how to do without effort. So, partners. In life, in the foundation, in all of it. What do you say? Chloe looked down at the keys in her hand, engraved with both their initials, and felt every ounce of doubt she'd carried since that first storm-soaked night finally settle into something certain and warm.
I say,
She said, stepping into him.
you'd better have coffee in this studio, because I plan on spending a considerable amount of time here.
Already stocked, Kaylin murmured, pulling her close. I told you. I planned this one carefully. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled gold across the Loire Valley, over vineyards and stone and a fountain that no longer seemed offensive at all, and somewhere in a bright new studio built from ruin and revelation, Chloe Davenport, courier, textile expert, unlikely savior of a man and a legacy she'd never expected to fall for, began the next chapter of a life neither of them had planned, but both of them, finally, wholly wanted.